Hello friends! This is my long incoming part 2 video about Koba's SP2SD V2 SmartPort hard disk emulator for Apple II computers. Today I'll be showing you how to put Apple II software on an SD card, perform basic functions, and see how it compares to the extremely popular but much more expensive FloppyEMU. So let's get started. You can save yourself time and trouble by getting the $8 SD card option when buying the SP2SD V2. The card has the required FAT32 file format and contains most of the games you'd ever want to use in the form of Total Replay and Total Replay 2. It boots directly into Total Replay without any setup on your part at all. There's more than 600 megabytes of software on the card, with plenty of space for you to add more. But for those of you who want to use your own SD card and start fresh, just make sure your card is rated for class 10 or faster. I personally like to use Gigastone V30 cards because they're super fast and reliable. Now if you have a Mac like me, you can use Apple's disk utility to format your SD card. Note that your SSD or your main hard drive will usually be at the top, so you don't want to format that. Now your SD card will most likely, if you have a Mac laptop like mine, be noted by SDXC. My XDSC reader is here, and here is the actual drive partition itself. Now you can erase this, but I don't recommend it. I recommend selecting the higher level reader itself, and that's because when you click erase, then you can see not only can you choose FAT, you also can choose the partition scheme, and you want to make sure you do not choose Apple Partition or GUID. You want to make sure you have the master boot record partition scheme here. And then once you do that, you can give it a name. I'm going to call it SP2SDV2, and then we're going to go ahead and erase it. And previously it was exFAT, but exFAT is not supported by SP2SD. You need to choose FAT16 or FAT32. This will have done a FAT32 format. And then we will be able to see that it says FAT32 right here. And of course you can use a PC to do the same. With a freshly formatted SD card, you'll then need some software, and I suggest you start by downloading Total Replay, a link to which I've included in the text description. Also be sure to grab Total Replay 2. Next, I recommend downloading Apple II Desktop, which makes your Apple II act like a Mac with a very cool point-and-click GUI. So go ahead and click the Download Disk Images link, and you have to scroll all the way to the very bottom, and then you can choose the language that suits you. English suits me best. I also recommend the Apple II edition of the classic game Glider, which was released a few months ago by Colin Leroy Mira on 143 kilobyte ProDOS disk image. And be sure to check out his development log to see how and why it was made. And lastly, let's get Colin's newest Apple II edition game, Shufflepuck, released about a month ago. It's fantastic to see these classic games working on an Apple II. And now it's time to copy our files to the SD card, which we see down here. But before we can do that, we see we've got a zip file. Let's go ahead and decompress that. And inside here we see we have several 5 1/4 inch 140 kilobyte disk images. We've got the 800K disk image and a 32 megabyte hard drive image. Now, although you would think you could just grab and copy all the files over, unfortunately that usually results in disk fragmentation of your SD card because FAT32, FAT16, and even exFAT, which again we can't use for SP2SD, those file formats fragment so easily, I want to rip my hair out at times. If you got a PC, you'll probably be okay. If you got an Intel Mac, you'll probably be okay. I'm using Apple Silicon, and it's a real headache for me. What you want to do, regardless of the computer that you have, is copy them over one at a time like this, and that usually can avoid fragmentation, except for me on my Apple Silicon Mac. For whatever reason, I've heard other people who have Apple Silicon don't have problems, but boy, I certainly do, and it's quite annoying, and the only way I can solve the problem is if I use a PC and an app called Defraggler to defragment it after I've copied these over, which is probably something I'm going to have to do. But again, if you're using a PC or Intel Mac, you probably won't have to do that, especially if you copy them over one at a time like I've done. Anyway, you are able now, according to Koba, to create subdirectories. So I'm going to create a folder here named 800K and put the 800K image inside that. Now there are caveats to doing this, and I'll describe that a little bit later. By the way, if you're wondering what my little background wallpaper is, you probably know the here's to the crazy ones.
Here's to the crazy
Remember that? That is retro stuff that you can get in the latest version of Mac OS. You can see the Mac retro themes here for your wallpapers, and they change in color and in the content constantly every time I sleep and wake my computer or reboot it. It's pretty neat, so I just wanted to mention that. And now it's time to insert my SD card. Note that I have my unit disconnected. Yours will probably already be still wired to your Apple II. Just make sure your Apple II is turned off before you add or remove the SD card. And we'll need to flip the SD card so that the printing is facing down. And by the way, Javier updated his plastic case STL files, and that makes it easier to insert and remove the SD card, as you saw me do just now. And this is his new case that I had printed at JLC PCB recently, and the old case, which you saw in my part 1 video, is here. And the old case on the side, it looked like this, and it was really hard to you had to use a tool to get it in and out, but now the SD card is much easier. And also he fixed the direction. Note the arrows, they're opposite now. This is the new case. This is correct. The direction of the arrows was incorrect on the old case. So those are the two main modifications he made. Flipped the arrow direction and also made improvements to the SD card insertion and removal there by basically cutting out a slot for it. So he made an already great case even better. So thank you, Javier. I now have everything connected to my Apple IIc. I'll go ahead and power on now. And before I can do anything else, I need to choose at least one disk image on my SD card for it to boot. You can see that there are 4 drive fields here, but drive 1 at the top is the only one that's bootable. Even though drives 2, 3, and 4 won't boot, you will still be able to access them as connected drives. So I'll go ahead and press the middle button here to choose drive 1. Press it again. And what I'm going to do is set up Total Replay as drive 1. So I've selected it, and then I push the middle button here. And from now on, you can see it's there in drive 1. SP2SD will automatically boot to Total Replay without me having to press any buttons. Now, by the way, the text on my monitor appears at power on because I have a ROM XC installed. It lets me boot my Apple IIc using any of the 4 available ROM versions. You see FF through 4 here. And it lets you do other fancy stuff too, but basically this text screen is really nice because there's no disk activity while it's displayed, and that's important because SP2SD will unfortunately freeze if there's disk activity when you press its buttons. Now, if you don't have ROM XC, Koba suggests holding down the Control and Reset keys so you can press the buttons on your SP2SD without worry about disk activity. But if you have an Apple IIc like me, having an easy way to switch ROMs is nice because the oldest ROM version 255, which is shown up here as FF, is not compatible with SmartPort and therefore not compatible with the SP2SD. And as you can see from the asterisk here, I'm using ROM4 currently. So now I'm going to press the X key so we can exit this menu. And it's going to do the boot here off of SP2SD. It's got my joystick, my Mockingboard, and here it is. Total Replay. Great. You just want to make sure that you have a joystick connector because some games in Total Replay will not appear at all or be playable without a joystick. I powered down my Apple IIc so I could remove the joystick and substitute it with the mouse. And I also disconnected my RCA composite connection to my eYoYo monitor so I could instead use Plowman's 2C to VGA adapter, which allows me to change from color to monochrome and then I power it on and I'm at the boot screen now. And now I'll make Apple II Desktop the boot drive. I'll choose the 32 megabyte hard drive image down here. And there's a known problem that I'll show you right now. I'll now press the X key to start the boot sequence. And it seems to start well. See, even has the clock there, but then it freezes. Koba told me that Apple II Desktop is expecting to see all 4 drive fields filled, and because I only have drive 1 set up, it freezes. That's just what I was told. So let's add drives to the other fields. Total replay as number 2. We'll just add glider, and then do Shufflepuck. So now all 4 are filled. I'll press X to start the boot sequence, and we get the startup screen that we got before, and what we're looking for is the progress bar, and there it is. So if you ever get a freeze, just fill all 4 drive fields and see if that's a fix. Now I'm going to get Plowman's adapter to give me some nice black and white here. Of course, the downside to filling all 4 drive fields is, as you can see, it takes more time for everything to mount for the additional 3 drives. I suppose that's a minor annoyance, but it is something to consider. This particular problem only affects SPIISD v2 because my FloppyEMU never freezes, even with only 1 SmartPort drive set up. So I reported that to Koba, and he said he would look into it. And there's one other thing that I need to mention. We can see here we've got the control panels open. If yours isn't open, just go up to the Apple menu and choose control panels. And then what you want to do is open up options, because according to the SPIISD v2 documentation, you need to disable copy to RAM card if present. Now, I don't have a RAM card, and I assume that's why I was able to boot without problem. Now, if you have a RAM card, I'm assuming that this is going to prevent you from booting. So you would need to put your SD card in your computer, use Virtual 2 or another emulator to disable that. And then you can put it into your SPIISD and then be able to boot. The other thing, which has nothing to do with SPIISD, FloppyEMU, or anything like that, at the bottom there's something called Preserve Uppercase and Lowercase in Names. I would recommend you check that because it really nabbed me the other day when I was trying to name things, making something all uppercase, and it wouldn't work. And then I was told, hey, that's because this isn't enabled. And supposedly the alpha version of the new version of A2 Desktop, which is after version 1.4, this is version 1.4, will have that enabled by default. But for now, for version 1.4 and earlier, you're going to have to manually check that. I mean, if you don't really care about capitalization of your file names, you can just leave it disabled. But to get file names to be capitalized as you would expect, then you would need to check that. But again, that has nothing to do with SPIISD, and you just need to make sure that copy to RAM card is disabled. Now this, again, only seems to pertain to the SPIISD and not the FloppyEMU, because I never had to do that. But then again, I don't have a RAM card, so I really can't say. But there wasn't any mention of this needing to be disabled in the FloppyEMU documentation. So that's just another difference between the SPIISD and this product. And by the way, SPIISD is advertised as having faster performance, which I guess is relative to version 1. This is version 2 of K's product. And I tested it. I benchmarked it with my FloppyEMU. To make it fair, I filled all 4 slots on both products, and I booted into Apple II Desktop, and the boot time was exactly the same. I mean exact. And I talked to Kay about that, and he said, well, the faster performance of the SPIISD v2 is noticeable on the Apple IIgs and not on the 2C. So just to let you know, if you're wondering why it doesn't seem to be faster, if you have an Apple IIc, I'm not sure about the Apple IIe, but the Apple IIgs is higher clock speed. I don't know if the connection is faster or not. I'm not so savvy in the world of Apple II, I apologize, but he just said that for the Apple IIgs there would be faster performance, but on this machine in particular there would not be. Doesn't mean it's slow, it just means it's going to be working at the same speed as the FloppyEMU. Another key difference between the FloppyEMU and the SP2SD V2 is how they deal with disk images. And if I go to the main menu here, we see that the FloppyEMU has a disk emulation mode, and that forces you to choose the mode according to the type of disk you have. If you have 3.5-inch floppy drive images, you have to choose Unidisc 3.5. If you have a smart port like a 32 megabyte total replay, you would choose smart port hard disk. And if you have a 5.25-inch floppy, it has a dedicated setting for that, even has dual. It's quite complex compared to the SP2SD. So if we choose Unidisc 3.5, then it will ask us to choose an 800K disk, and we can choose something like Apple II Desktop. And then it will allow us to either boot from that disk, or we can eject it and choose another. In comparison, SP2SD has no special modes, and it lets you use SmartPort hard disk images, 800K 3.5-inch disk images, and even 140 kilobyte images too in any of its 4 drive fields, so long as they're ProDOS disks. And we can see that by changing the boot drive to this 140 kilobyte ProDOS disk named Glider. And here we go, booting off that 140 kilobyte floppy disk image. Woohoo, Glider! Oh. But the downside to SP2SD in comparison to the FloppyEMU is that SP2SD cannot use DOS 3.3 images. The FloppyEMU can. And SP2SD has pretty restrictive file name extension limitations too. For example, the Asimov website has a huge collection of Apple II software, but most of the disk images found there have a .dsk file name extension that's incompatible with SP2SD V2. And you can't just change the name extension to make it work. SP2SD only supports file name extensions .po, .2mg, and .hdv. That's it. And even if you have a compatible file name extension, the SP2SD V2 requires ProDOS images only. DOS 3.3 images won't work. I sometimes use OneGeekArmy's excellent Disk Jockey app on my Mac to quickly and easily check if a given disk image is ProDOS or not, simply by drag and drop. I'll do one here, for example. This is a .dsk, which is incompatible because of the file name extension. But as we can see, it is ProDOS. It's just that the extension is incompatible. And if we try another one, sometimes it has problems. In this case, it crashed. If we try it again, on a different image, this one is ProDOS, and it's saying that it's .po. So this particular one should be able to work. If we try this one. This is ProDOS, but it's .do. So the file name is incompatible, and again, we can't just rename it. And if we try Starbase, again, it has a lot of problems sometimes with Apple II disk images. But one thing I found to be true is that if I use CiderPress, which thankfully works on my Apple Silicon Mac, and I open that same Starbase disk, we see that even though it's .2mg, which is technically a file name extension that should be compatible with SP2SD v2, it's DOS3, see 3.x, and so therefore it's incompatible. And checking the other one, yeah, the .do file is ProDOS, but it's .do. So overall, if you want to check your disks, even though the Mac native app written by One Geek Army is a little bit nicer in terms of its GUI, it has some troubles with Apple II disks, and CiderPress is really the way to go if you want to figure out if a disk is ProDOS or DOS 3.3. But at the end of the day, SP2SD v2 is really a SmartPort hard disk emulator, not a floppy disk emulator. So if you're trying to test 140 kilobyte floppy disk images, it's going to be a fair amount of trial and error. Those limitations don't apply to the FloppyEMU because it lets you use most any floppy disk format you like. And that's because it emulates real floppy drives, whereas the SP2SD is really just a SmartPort hard drive emulator. And that partly explains why the SP2SD costs so much less than the FloppyEMU. There's one other difference between the SP2SD and the FloppyEMU. Because the FloppyEMU emulates real floppy drives, it's subject to the same limitations as those real drives. And on the Apple IIc like mine, you can't boot from an external floppy disk drive unless you either have ROM-XC or you have this drive switcher from Big Mess of Wires. I had this nice case 3D printed in JLC black resin, and I put a link to the STL files for you in the video description below. A huge shout out to Mr. Lurch for having created them. This one dip switch lets you make your FloppyEMU act as a bootable internal drive or external drive. You have to set it to external when your FloppyEMU is in SmartPort hard disk mode. SP2SD doesn't need the drive switcher at all because it's only emulating a SmartPort drive and not a 5¼ inch floppy drive. In closing, I'd like to share a few additional gripes about the SP2SD v2. These are not deal breakers by any means, but I'm just mentioning them because it would be great if a future firmware update could address them. First and foremost, folders have no icon, so it's harder to distinguish them from disk images. And you will remember that earlier in this video I created the folder 800K, and that's how I know it's a folder. And I suppose you could say, well, hey look, the disk images have a 3-letter or 2-letter extension and a folder does not, so that's how you know. Sure, but it would still be better if it had an icon next to it, a little bit more graphical like the FloppyEMU. Next, long file names show dots in the middle and they don't scroll automatically when selected, which means if you have a similarly named file and the only difference between that and multiple others is something in the middle, you're not going to be able to differentiate between them. Also, the same applies here, right? You can see that the 3 dots in the middle prevent you from saying the name, and even though it's selected, it's not scrolling over. And once you do select it, notice how the folder name comes first and then a slash and then the name, which further truncates the name. And it doesn't auto scroll, so you can't actually see what it is. And if you have multiple files in the folder that are named similarly, you're going to have a hard time figuring out what is what. So it would be nice to have auto scroll to show you the full name. My gripe number 3 is a little bit surprising but true. You can actually add the same disk image multiple times. You see here, 1, 2, and 3 are exactly the same disk image. And I can keep going. I can add it again a 4th time. And many software programs won't care about this, but this is A2 Desktop. And so if you boot A2 Desktop with more than one instance of itself, it's going to try to load all 4 drive slots, and it's going to throw an error. It's not going to prevent A2 Desktop from working, but you of course won't be able to mount drives 2 through 4, and it's just a little bit of an annoyance. Next, you can easily change disk images, but there's no way to delete them using the LCD and buttons, forcing you to edit the config file on your computer if you want to delete drives 2, 3, and 4 and just have a single boot drive. And lastly, the FloppyEMU reduces its OLED brightness after several seconds to prevent burn-in, but SPIISD doesn't. Putting it all in perspective, SPIISD V2 is a low-cost SmartPort drive that's useful despite its quirks. The lowest cost kit will set you back $32 plus shipping, in contrast to the lowest cost FloppyEMU, which costs $109 plus shipping. And if you own an Apple IIc like mine, you'll probably want the drive switcher as well, which costs an additional $22. Now don't get me wrong, the FloppyEMU is a fantastic product. I absolutely love mine, and I have 2 even. But I realize that not everybody is going to take advantage of all of the features that this has to offer. And if you already have a FloppyEMU, SPIISD V2 still offers something useful if you have multiple Apple IIs, for instance, and all you need is simply a low-cost SmartPort drive. It's low cost enough to where you may be willing to overlook its deficiencies and just sit back and enjoy what it has to offer. And that wraps up our video today. If you like what you saw, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and please subscribe and click the bell icon to receive notifications of my future videos. Speaking of which, I recently purchased this stunning LCD retrofit kit for my SE30, direct from the brilliant and talented creator Zigzag Joe, and I intend to showcase the installation in my next video. So be sure you don't miss out on that. Thank you for watching today, folks, and I wish all of you a fantastic week. Bye-bye. Alright, Shufflepuck. Let's see what we got here. Play over serial. Then we've got Neural, Lexon, Skip. Okay, I'll skip you then. Enig. Up here is DC3 the robot. We've got Beijing. I guess she looks a little Chinese. Vinny, Biff, Visine. Exit, quit game. And tournament. Okay, let's play DC3. Here we go. Wow. This is an Apple II. Amazing. Ready, go. Oh. Oh. It's even got sound effects. No music, but... Woohoo! Rack it up. I mean, this is a fun game regardless of platform, but on the Apple II, so very cool. Oh, come on. Hey. All right, here we go. Now it's time to ramp up. Haha! Boop, boop. Hey, hey! Hey, hey! Hey, hey! All right. Did I win? I guess I did. Hey, hey!